Hi, my name is Laura Cathcart Robbins. I am the author of the brand new memoir, Stash My Life in Hiding. I'm also the host of the very popular podcast, The Only One in the Room.
Okay. Well, I'm really excited to chat with you about the book. We'll dive into that in a
Okay.
second. But first, let's do the lightning round at the
Yeah.
beginning.
Yes.
So, when did you first identify as a writer?
I think the first time I was thinking about this, the first time I identified as a writer was when I was 10 years old and I won the Ebony Magazine third place prize for their writing contest. They were starting a magazine called Ebony Junior.
Uh-huh.
And which they was in publication for a few years after that, and so they wanted to have as many contributors as possible. So I won third place. I got a plaque that I kept on my bedroom wall for years, and ever since then I thought, well, that's what I am. I'm a writer.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Ebony Magazine, third
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
Damn. Okay.
Thought so.
Um, what's your all-time favorite book?
It's really a tie between A Tree Grows in Brooklyn and The Bluest Eye.
Okay, what do you love about these books?
A Tree Grows in Brooklyn was a book that I probably read, maybe 20 times from the ages of 7 through 19,
Hmm.
and just always found myself in different places in the book. The Bluest Eye was the first book that I'd ever read about someone who looked like me. That was not a kid's book. That was not just a drawing, an illustration with someone with curly hair and brown skin. And the experience that the little girl had and the family had in the book mirrored my own real life experience in a way that I'd never found in a book before.
What's the book about? I've never read it.
The Bluest Eye.
Hmm.
It's Toni Morrison, and it's about a little girl. It's like the deep South, way back when, and there is a doll that she falls in love with, this blue-eyed doll, and it kind of
Oh,
goes on from there because there's overt racism all around. This is even pre-Jim Crow,
right.
where there just were no rights given to Black people, and this doll kind of becomes both her talisman and the bane of her existence.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
What's your dream writing routine?
My dream writing routine is to work out and get everything done by 11 a.m. and then write for as long as I want.
That is the dream. Yes. What's reality? What's your real writing routine?
It's pretty close. I,
Oh, amazing.
I'm a good planner, so for the most part, while I was writing Stashed, my memoir, I started at 11 and I knocked off at 7 with a break for lunch and stretching. But that was it, 5 days a week.
Nice.
Yeah.
What about because you're a podcaster too? And I find for me, like that's a totally different energy. I love it too, but it's a totally different energy. So, how do you do both and like make sure that you're not like blowing all your energy before you get your writing done?
Well, like for instance, because I'm on a book tour right now,
Uh-huh.
we batched all of our episodes at a
Oh,
time where
nice.
I had time. So I didn't have to do it because you're right, it's a lot of energy
Yeah.
between both. It's hard for me to do both. But there's besides the interviews, there's a lot that goes in, of course, as you know, to making a podcast.
Yeah.
So what I would try to do is on the days where I had interviews, I would write less, but
Hmm.
I could do like the other work, like the show notes and writing. We have a thesis at the beginning of each show, so writing and recording the thesis and like that kind of stuff I would do until it hit 11 o'clock, and then I would write.
That's smart.
Yeah.
Um, that's my like struggle right now is like, how do I do both? What's one piece of writing that makes you jealous you didn't write it?
Ugh, it's Holly Whitaker's Substack.
Mm.
She's an amazing friend of mine. She's the blurb on the cover of my book. She's one of the first quit lit books I've ever read. One of them. And she has this crazy Substack, and every single word on the page is something that I should have written. I could have written.
I love that. Yeah,
Yes.
that has become a whole genre, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
It
so
totally
interesting.
has.
Okay, so let's talk about the book, which I loved. What's set listeners up? What's the premise?
So the book is about a 10-month period in my life during the year of 2008, during which I end a marriage, enter treatment for drugs and alcohol addiction or alcoholism, whatever you want to call it. And I talk about how I fell in love, which isn't necessarily true. I think I kind of fell in love with myself toward the end, but I also started a relationship with someone. So it's really more of that. It's starting a relationship, ending a marriage, and going into treatment. So
Mhm.
that's what's covered in the book.
I love the interiority that, you do such a good job of like, we're in your head, if you're like going through a breakdown at a moment or whatever's happening, like we get all the beats with you. And I think that's like such a skill to do that well. So, first of all, just compliments. But I'm curious about the writing process. I saw in the acknowledgments you took some classes at UCLA, published a little bit at HuffPost, but part of the book, you talk about you were mostly a wife and a mother and maybe like weren't doing as much career stuff. So how did you find writing again and like reincorporate it into your life and like get started on this book?
Wow, it's such a big answer to that, so I'll try to keep it brief, but I got sober in the year 2008, so it'll be 15, almost 15 years for me coming up this summer. But after I got sober, I really lost the ability to read and write for pleasure. It was something that I had been my identity, and then it was gone. And that was my biggest fear, besides losing my kids. That was my
Mhm.
biggest fear. But under that was my fear of tampering with that flow, that wellspring of identity that I had that didn't have anything to do with anyone else. It wasn't predicated on a role. It was just who I was, and it was gone. And so I thought, first things first, I've got to like get sober and get this recovery thing and keep my kids in my life, and maybe it'll come back. And then around 5 years, it still wasn't back. Like there were books that people, said, you have to read this. And I would sit down and my mind would just snap shut after like 3 sentences and I had to put
Mm.
it down. And it was a real period of grief for me. So that's why I started taking classes. I started taking classes in the hopes that it would kind of get those juices going again. Like if someone's body is starving, just to kind of force feed it little bits of food until it gets hungry again.
Yeah.
Was those classes were my force feeding my writing soul and reading soul, because you have to read other people's work and give feedback. And eventually, I just I didn't graduate from high school, I didn't go to college, I just stayed in classes for like 10 years and just took class after class after class after class, sometimes two at a time, and kept it going. And eventually that led me to a proposal for a much larger period of my life. I was going to write about like right before I got married until current times. And one of the rejections I got from an agent kind of circled out this piece of the book that they called it the meat of the book this year. And so I stripped everything away and I decided to write about that year. And yeah, so that's what I did.
I love that and I so relate. Like I am forever a student. I've just been taking like writing classes for ever since probably like 10 years, like just with no immediate goal. I mean, there is a book, but it's just it feels good. So what was, when you started publishing some of these as essays, what was the response and how did it eventually find the form of something resembling Stash and where you could, I mean, did you sell it first or did you write the whole thing first?
Yeah, I think that all of this, once I knew that with that final rejection from the agent, she gave me a laundry list of stuff that I might want to look at doing before I went back to an agent. And one of them, she said to me, memoir is the hardest thing to sell because, it doesn't matter how beautifully written it might be. If no one knows who you are, it's just really hard to sell. She also told
Mhm.
me that memoir is hard to sell incomplete, that I should come back with a complete manuscript and not just a proposal. These were her suggestions. She talked about building an author's platform and she gave me steps for it. It was an amazing rejection. It was
That
the most
is.
amazing rejection I ever got. So I took it as a call to action and I started down that list and I started a blog. I started storytelling. I won a moth. I started writing and publishing articles. Like I was doing everything that she said to do. Stash came out of 30 pages in a query I wrote for HarperCollins during the summer of 2020. It was their response to the cultural reckoning that was happening in the world. And they decided to take 30 pages in a query from unagented Black authors for that summer only. I didn't have either. I decided to write them. I submitted them. I got a rejection because it was for fiction only, which I didn't read. I just got excited and read as like what I needed to read, I thought. Anyway, so it was rejected. Going back to Holly Whitaker, I sent her those pages a few months later. She kind of freaked out over them and sent them right to her agent. That was like on a Friday. I sent them to Holly. On Saturday, she freaked out. And on Tuesday, I had a signed contract from her agent.
What?
It went fast and it was based on those 30 pages and that query. The agent then asked me, how quickly can you write this? And that's when I got into that 11/7 pattern and I wrote it in 6 months.
That is an incredible story. That Harper's Call-in, like that was, you needed that
Yes.
anyway, even though it
Yes.
wasn't like that thing, it led you to the thing. That's amazing.
Yes.
So, Stash deals with some really personal, sensitive topics, and, your kids are eventually going to know about it and whatever, but you let it all, like you told the whole story. So I'm curious about how you decided what boundaries you were going to have around that stuff, or if you were just like, I need to tell the whole story. What was your approach in that way?
Yeah, I had no qualms about telling my story at all. My kids are really familiar with my story. And remember, this was in 2008. They were little then, but they're grown men now. And they grew up in a sober home. Like I have recovery meetings in my house every week.
Mhm.
We've talked about my story. We've talked about the divorce a lot. And I think they feel very secure because their dad and I continue to raise them after all this went down together. So, like, there isn't anything in there that's shocking for them, but they haven't read it.
Oh, really?
No, they just one of them is just honestly not interested. He loves me and he's so supportive, but is like, is it okay if I don't sit down and read this? And I'm like, of course. But their girlfriends have read it and reported to them what's in there. And so, but they've been amazing this whole time. My boys, my sons, they have just like every step of the way been so supportive and celebratory and proud of me. So I didn't want to tell their story. I didn't want to tell what it might have been like for them. I didn't want to assume anything on their behalf. So I was really mindful. I tried to be really mindful of just telling how it was for me, which is why it's active first person, which is why you're only in my head. I almost never pop out and give you perspective
Mhm.
because that would obligate me to take an overview, I think, and possibly incorporate other people's stories into it. And I really didn't want to do that.
That's really smart. And it sounds like even your ex-husband gave you his blessing to write this book. What was
He's
that
also very supportive.
conversation like?
Yeah. Yeah, he was really supportive and continues to be.
That's amazing. So, okay, you got the agent and the publisher. You wrote it in 6 months. Was there an editing process or what was that like?
Yeah, I actually, as I wrote it, my agent read it and kind of came back and gave me notes.
That's nice.
So I'd turn in a chapter and she'd say, "Where are the stakes?" I need higher stakes. That's all their notes were. It was like, I don't need to turn the page here. Where's the stakes here? Like, what's the ticking clock?
Uh-huh.
And so I had all this other stuff in there that she was just like, there's no stakes here. There's no stakes. So I just took it out. So when she went out with it went at auction. There was a bidding war over it, which was
Nice.
really heady. That was like I got onto each of those meetings assuming that I was going to be pitching my book, and they were like these editors at HarperCollins and at Penguin Random House and at Simon and Schuster were pitching me, and that was nuts. And I ended up going with Simon and Schuster, Atria at Simon and Schuster.
What
And,
was your reasoning?
you know, Michelle Mulligan Herrera, who's my editor, she wrote me this letter that floored me. Like
Mm.
it took me out at the knees. It was so intuitive and vulnerable. And she so clearly saw what I was doing with the book and got it. I had never seen a letter like that. I had never felt like that. And it was still not an easy choice, even with that, but that was what tipped the scales for me.
Nice.
Yeah.
Were you able to repurpose anything that you had published online before the book came to be?
I think small like paragraphs or stuff. I'm sure I steal from myself all the time and repurpose.
Totally.
So I'm sure I did, but I can't picture anything right now but not an entire page or essay or anything like that. No. And
Gotcha.
maybe I could have, but I just didn't.
I mean, and then it got published. So what was you're on a book tour right now. What was been the PR experience? How did you leverage your podcast? How did you think about, the marketing part of it?
Just really quickly going back to the repurposing thing. I was also told at the variety of writers festivals and conferences I went to be mindful of what I put out there because they may not want it for the book if it was out in the world. I actually
Oh,
don't think that's true, but more than one person told me that. So I was really careful about not writing about the things that I wanted in the book specifically. The themes, of course, but not the actual incidents. So that was part of it too, is that I didn't want to have that overlap there.
yeah. So I have published things in the past that I'm planning to use in my memoir, but now that I'm like really kind of in it and working on it, I am finding myself similarly like not wanting to publish any of that stuff because I'm like, I would want to use this as a piece to promote the book or just like, I don't know if you know,
Well,
publish
that's
it
the
for
other thing.
$200 right now. It's like, what am I doing?
Well, and I had written other essays and I did use them to promote the book. So that going back to the book tour and the PR, that question was I have two essays out right now that I wrote before the book was published. I wrote them all before the book was published. And two that got published on the strength of the book. And so they're like nice companion pieces. And then HuffPo published an excerpt from the book too. That actually got me the most hits. That moved the needle the most on Amazon
Nice.
with the book. And it moved the needle like on like my social media, on our website clicks. The article published 2 weeks prior to that, and that moved the needle, but not as dramatically as the excerpt did. The excerpt was money. Like I had no idea how important an excerpt was. So whenever I write another book and my advice, which I know is coming, that question, I don't know if this is the piece of advice, but I would definitely say to push for an excerpt somewhere to pitch it, wherever you can, wherever your publicist might have some leverage. If you have a publicist, if you're doing it yourself, then to use whatever connections you might have to try to get an excerpt published.
Yeah. So because the publisher has some team probably in-house or whatever, and then did you hire someone too? And like, how are they working together? And what else has moved the needle?
The TV appearances move the needle the most.
Mm.
So MSNBC and Tamron Hall, I went from like 60,000 on Amazon to 18 like overnight.
Oh, nice.
And they came out back to back. So TV definitely moved the needle the most. I have a publicist who's helping me with podcasts specifically, but not anything else. The publicist at Simon and Schuster is handling everything else. However, the MSNBC, the Tamron Hall, a lot of the pieces that HuffPo excerpt and the articles I got myself.
Ooh.
My contacts that I developed while I was writing this book for this purpose.
So it's really been like a trifecta effort of getting it out there.
Yes, yes.
Any other big takeaways from the post part of it, the tour promotional part that you would say, like, advice for other writers?
I think, like, for the book tour itself, like book events, again, this is like through all the connections I made before I wrote the book, finding the best partners for conversation at these places. And not just somebody who gets me and like likes the book, but somebody who has a following
Mhm.
wherever I go and they can bring in people because it makes it so much better and more lively than to just stand up there by myself or with somebody who may not have any sway or you need people to care about your conversation partner if it's not your town. If it's your
Totally.
town, it's something different, but since I've been touring around, once I knew what my schedule was back in, like, September of 2022, I started scouting for those partners and cultivating those relationships and getting the word out in those cities that I was coming, but so and so would be there, and I know you love her, like, so, please come out and see the 2 of us, and I've been able I mean, I wouldn't say I've been able to, but so far, each event has exceeded my expectations, been standing room only. It's been amazing.
That's incredible. You see on Twitter, there are people who, like, tweet the empty chairs, so
Yeah,
it's nice
yes,
when you get people to show up.
exactly. Well, I went to a couple of those, not mine, but I as a conversation partner, I didn't realize that part of the burden was on me to bring in people. I just showed up thinking, this is gonna be fun, and then there's no one. I'm like, "Oh, we really have to promote. Like, this cannot be. We can't have it'll be me and, like, the person who's shopping for a book otherwise, right? They might
Yeah,
peek over and see me sitting there in the chair with a microphone, so,
yeah,
uh,
you don't wanna be sad at your reading.
no, no.
What about
The only other
podcasts?
thing, just really quick, is blurbs.
Oh,
So important for sales, not sales to readers, I don't think is important. Maybe they are, but to booksellers, to get the book sold to booksellers. I didn't realize how quickly we needed them and how important they were, and I didn't realize how much of it was on me to get them, and it's really hard to get blurbs. It's a big ask.
yeah.
You're not only asking somebody for their time, but you're asking them in advance to endorse something that they haven't read, and so you gotta be really sure of whoever you're sending that blurb out to. I probably asked 20 people, and I got 8 really good ones, but it was through the podcast that I got most of my blurbs. They were guests.
Same.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just put together a proposal for something, and I also totally leveraged my podcast contacts, and was like, "I would be fucked if I did not have these people, I would have no one." Like, I don't even know how you make those connections otherwise, and it's also like you have something to offer them too, or like, in a lot of cases, it's like they'd been a guest on my podcast. They knew that I could produce a good thing in that realm. Like there was a little bit of a trust and like I'd given them something in a way already, but yeah, that was a whole trip.
Yes. No, it's so true. I'm actually giving a talk about that at Outlier. Do you ever go to
Oh
that?
yeah, I'm gonna be there too.
Oh,
Oh,
good. Yeah.
awesome. I'm gonna go to your talk.
I'm
Great.
gonna give a talk about me thinking that the podcast was just a means to an end, but it ended up being like the sustaining life's blood for this author's journey of mine.
Yes. Okay, tell me, because I think that's like an underrated kind of thing. Like, how did you leverage your podcast?
Well, I mean, aside from the connections for the blurbs, one of the things we did was we're publishing excerpts from the book on our feed.
Oh,
So
smart.
Simon and Schuster Audios, cutting them, and then we're dropping them. I interviewed people from the book and made it part of our regular season, but it's
That
because they're in Stash My Life in Hiding. That's the only reason they're on the show. I interviewed the woman I was in treatment with. I interviewed Scott. I've interviewed the woman who's my best friend in the book. So that's another way that we leverage the podcast itself. But the community has been like, what can I do? How can I
amazing.
support this? What do you need? Should we do a feed drop? Or I ran an ad of yours. I recommended to Simon and Schuster where to run ads because I know what the similar podcasts are. And I mean, obviously they're in the business, but this is a unique book in that it's Black, it's
Mhm.
addiction, and it's privilege.
Yeah.
And so those three things aren't necessarily something they would have marketed before. Or is it three different audiences? Are we catering to a Black privileged addict audience? Like where do we go for those podcasts or for those? So I was able to really help with that because I'm so, ensconced in the podcast world at this point.
Nice.
Yeah.
And is that how you knew Lauren too? Like to go with Tink?
Yes. Yes. I know her because she sends me the best pitches.
Totally, she does.
They're always individualized. I like mass pitches I give to our associate producer and like have her kind of cover them for me because we get so many submissions.
Yeah.
But Lauren's one, she has my personal email address, which almost nobody else does. So they come directly to me, but they're always so tailored. I mean, I don't think she sent me anything that's not a good fit.
Agreed. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. That's why we're doing this.
Yeah.
So, readers, I'm curious, like, we talked about how this is like a whole new genre now. So, I'm curious, did you hear back from other members of the sober community or anyone else who could kind of relate to this? And what was their response in that way?
Yeah, I literally my eyes just filled with tears when you said that because the response has been so overwhelming. I had a bookseller contact me right before the book came out and tell me that she had been reading Stash with her sister. And when they finished the book, her sister made the decision to check herself into treatment.
Oh.
And when I went to the event in San Francisco, they both came. And her
Oh.
sister is 115 days sober. And like, I have a book that I take around that's it's Stash, but I without the cover, and I ask other people to sign it at every book signing. And, Anna is the woman's name who contacted me, the bookseller. She wrote in the middle of it, "Thank you for saving my sister's life." And
Oh.
I have a picture of them. I posted it, with their permission, of course. And that was just one of the best moments, I think, of my life, honestly. But my everyday Scott, my boyfriend, who's also in the book, is like, get off your phone at the end of the day. But I sit there at the end of the day and I go through all the DMs and I respond to them because there's so many. I can't get to them during the day. So I just sit in bed and I take 15 minutes and I get through as many as I can. But so many are from people in the recovery community who are like, thank you. This is my story. Thank you. This is my story. Thank you. This is my mom's story. Thank you. I see my mom differently now because I know that it wasn't just that she didn't care that she had a disease. Like it's been amazing.
Oh, that's so good. So what's next? Do you have anything you're working on? I know you got to get through this tour first, but do you have any ideas about what's coming up?
Yeah, actually, after my New York events, my agent and my publisher, who I rarely worked with, except for like the occasional like supportive email, talked to me about writing a novel next. And
Oh,
they had a couple of ideas, and one of them I really liked. So I'm actually working on that outline.
good for you. Nice. That's totally different, right? Are you
Really
finding that?
different. Well, it is and it isn't. Like my writing style is kind of novelish.
Yes.
I'm not a traditional memoirist. I just don't write like that. So the style won't be that much different, but
Making
kind
shit
of
up.
disguising my own real life experience and
Yeah.
fictionalizing it, that'll be different.
Yeah. Are you finding it freeing in a way or
I haven't really started writing it yet, just kind of like outlining it. So I don't know. I don't know.
okay.
We'll see when I get into that 11 to 7 pattern.
I'm
See.
curious. Yeah. Do you have any bucket list writing goals?
Uh Gosh, I don't know. I mean, I'd like to be able to make a living as a writer. Is that a bucket list writing goal?
I think so. That's same for me. Yeah.
Yeah, boy, it's really like as I was going through this process, I'm like, why do people do this?
Totally.
It's really it's a lot of work for financially very little yield. But I mean, there are other rewards for sure, but just like I don't know that many writers who make a living just writing. I know that writers who make a living speaking and writing
Mhm.
or teaching and writing. But I probably only know a couple that make a living as writers, period. not counting TV. I know a lot of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's its own form of addiction, I think.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think. Okay, so what's one piece of writing advice you wish you could give your former self?
I don't know. My temptation is to say to like take it easy, but I don't even know if that's true. I think it would be the opposite. I think it would have been to be more disciplined about this thing because the discipline really pays off. And the idea, like to work through the fear of sitting in front of a blank page or failing and not let that stop me from creating a schedule that I could engage in every day and actually produce something. Like, I think my fear is that I wouldn't produce anything or I wouldn't produce anything worthwhile if I did what I did when I wrote Stash. And the truth is that whatever I did would have been worthwhile.
Nice. What's one tip for writers trying to get a book published?
I would just say, the money for me was making those connections and finding people that were where I want it to be and doing informational interviews, like DMing them, whatever you can tell me. Like, I don't want to take all your time, but is there some place I should start? Is there somebody I should know? I'm pitching here, I'm submitting here. Do you have any tips for me? You just published a big article in the New Yorker. I'd love to do that. Can you connect me? It's a big ask sometimes, but I made a lot of really great connections that way, and I use them throughout the process.
Yeah,
I'm
go
not afraid
for
to
it.
DM people.
Sometimes you gotta. What's your all-time favorite piece of your own writing? And you can totally say Stash.
Oh, it totally is. It's absolutely Stash My Life in Hiding. I mean, I just couldn't be prouder of it. Like, I hear about writers saying they're so tired of their book by the time it comes out. I'm not. I love reading it.
It's very good. Yes.
And I had to read it lots of times in the audiobook. Oh my goodness. Reading it all out loud was such a trip. But yeah, I love it and I'm proud of it. And I'm really excited that it's actually out in the world.
Well, congratulations. I had a really good time. I went back and forth. I read and listened to
Ah,
you. So I had both experiences. And I mean, like I said at the beginning, I think it's so good. And I think, the way that we stay with you the whole time is just such a powerful way to tell the story. And I was fully enwrapped the whole time.
oh,
So that's a successful book.
yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me on. This has been such a treat and I love what you do. I've listened to a few of your episodes now and
Oh, thank you.
I'm just you're like you talked about a piece of writing that I envied. This would be a podcast that I envy. Like, I wish I had started this. It's so good.
Well, you're welcome to come back. We're excited to talk about your novel next time. How can listeners connect with you online?
So there are two ways. There's theonlyonepod.com. That's our website and everything is there. All the socials, all my interviews, all my HuffPo pieces. I am the most prolific HuffPo essayist of all time, by the way.
Oh, I
Yeah.
know when I read in the acknowledgments like 18 or 19 times, I was like,
Yes,
damn.
it's a lot. Now it's 21.
Okay.
But so all the interviews, everything's there. Or I'm usually on Instagram. That's where I'm most responsive. You can find me at Laura Cathcart Robbins. No one ever knows how to spell Cathcart. It's CATHCART, Robbins with two B's and an S.
Well, thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it, Courtney.